and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is the author of the book, The Power of Personality, no other than Mr. Eric G.
How's it going? How are you, Daniel?
I'm fabulous, fabulous like you, Mr. Eric. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a writing coach and a life coach. I think I combine those two together, which is kind of odd, but what I've learned is that, when you try to teach people how to write, you got to teach them how to find their voice. To teach people how to find their voice, you got to teach them how to find themselves. So I wrote a book and it was published last year. It's called The Power of Personality, and it's all about how to read people and understand them through personality types. And when you learn about what people value, you can kind of determine what personality type they are. And the more you know about who they are and all those kinds of things, then the better you can get along, right? And I think that's kind of, my book is more of an in-depth version of how to discover that exactly.
Certainly, Mr. Eric G. Thank you so much for sharing the power of personality. Why is understanding personality essential for improving personal and professional relationships?
Well, I think we all understand that people are different than us, but I think the assumptions we make are that the differences are pretty superficial, right? Like am I more responsible than you are, or more organized versus more flexible and spontaneous? But I think the truth is we're very different based on very strongly held values. And I think that when we have differences based on our values, it's hard to understand those. And that's what garners a lot of conflict. So if we can just understand, oh, okay, this person values safety and security, but I value, let's say, excitement, which are two competing values, and it's okay to do both those things because I think we need both those kinds of people in the world. And once we learn that, then basically the work environment gets better. Obviously, parents have it easier with their kids, they can understand, okay, I like this kid a little bit more than my other kid because we probably share a similar personality. And then, of course, relationships. Everyone always asks me that. And it's basically if you understand what you want and understand what the other person wants, you can still complain, but at least you'll understand, okay, I can't try to change the person across from me because if you do that, it's never going to end up right. So, I mean, those are three easy ways where understanding personality types can really help people in their everyday life.
Certainly. So, what common misconceptions do people have about personality traits?
I think one of the big ones, and I see it all the time, is extroversion, introversion. I think there are a lot of books written about oh, it's okay to be introverted and all that jazz. But at the end of the day, what I've found through my research and application is that, introversion depends on the context, right? I think oftentimes we're not as extroverted when we're not really into something. And we get a little more aggressive when we are, right? And so at the end of the day, it's more what do you like? What are you interested in? And that tends to determine how outgoing you are when you're in that situation. So I think it's not our personality types aren't really determined on whether we're more extroverted, introverted. It's more what do we value, and within those things, then we can kind of discover our own personality.
Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Eric, how does learning about different personality types help in managing conflicts?
Well, I mean, number one, let's just take a relationship, for example, right? If you know that you like things safe and secure and you like things set and certain, you probably actually theoretically would get along with someone who doesn't like those things because opposites always attract, right? And it's funny because when we get into relationships, we often look for opposites because it complements us. But then once we actually, get further along in the commitment, we try to change the other person and become like us. So I think just in terms of even just pure relationships, I think if we understand the differences in our partner, then we'll understand and appreciate those differences versus trying to change them.
Very well said, Mr. Eric. Beautifully articulated. So, in what ways can recognizing your own personality traits lead to a greater self awareness and growth?
Well, I think there are lots of different personalities, but there are a few personality types that are more prevalent than others. So I think there's a group that makes up about half the population, and that's quite a lot of people. And so their values tend to get pushed on the rest of us. And while that's great because their values are generally about tradition, customs, keeping things organized, taking away chaos, that's not always great for everybody. And I think it's good to know what your own personality type is so that when someone tells you that you should be different than what you are, you don't budge. I think it's important to go, look, this is who I am. I can become a better version of this, but I'm not going to be something else. Right. So, like, let's say, I use animal types to signify the different personalities. And I always like to say, puppies don't grow into cats; they grow into dogs. So, like that's the same for the animal personality types. If you are, let's say, a fox personality type, and I think we can all figure out kind of what foxes are like. They're sneaky, sly, clever, shrewd, and that's cool. And you're like a total hustler. Then don't listen to when people tell you, "Oh, stop hustling and just kind of have the 9 to 5 set job," because that's not going to benefit you when you grow up. You just want to be a good hustler, right? So as you're growing up, try to become the best version of yourself. And I think that's why it's so important to realize what we are first so we don't go changing it.
Certainly. Stop barking, people, if you're
Mhm.
barking the wrong tree.
That's right. Don't
So,
bark if you're a cat.
yes. So, can personality truly change over time, or is it largely fixed?
I would say it's probably largely at a certain point, it's largely fixed. I don't know what that point is. Like some people, like their personality types kind of show at an earlier age. But I do think people don't change. I think when people do think they've changed, it's probably just because they've learned more about themselves and they're actually realizing their true personality versus what they thought when they were younger. Maybe their parents told them to be a certain way and they believed it. And then as they grow older and get more freedom, they realize, you know what, I'm not really like that. And I think that's when people feel like they've changed, right? But I'm always, once again, I say we can't change. We just grow and we can grow into better versions of ourselves. And we can also grow into worse versions of ourselves, which is why it's so important to understand ourselves as quickly as we can. So the quicker we do that, then we can understand what flaws our personality type inherently carries, and we can kind of work on those.
Certainly. So, how does personality affect communication styles and preferences, Mr. Eric?
Like I used to work with, I owned an education company for about a decade. And so I always use this as an example. I would tell my teachers, there are certain kids who are not going to respond well to you telling them to be careful. Now,
Yes.
half the population value safety and security. So, of course, you tell them to be careful. They're like, I get that. Like, I should be careful. But, that other third that likes exciting things and likes taking risks, as a kid, if you keep telling them to be careful, then you're basically telling them that their strongest points and strongest traits are not good and they're never going to learn to take the risks. So when they get older, they're going to take risks poorly. So I always tell, like, in terms of communication, if you're going to try to communicate to people like that, you don't tell them to be careful. You tell them to focus or you tell them to concentrate. And essentially, you're kind of saying the same thing. You're saying, like, hey, like, really focus and pay attention when you're doing whatever risky thing you're doing. But they read it totally differently. If you tell them to concentrate or to focus, they'll be like, okay, it's okay for me to take risks in life. I just need to be concentrate when I do them. And I think that's just one example of how learning about personality types can help us communicate with people differently.
Certainly. So, why is empathy important in unlocking the secrets of personalities?
I mean, empathy is like the number one trait that we need to understand people, right? Like, I think
Yes.
as opposed to sympathy is just like more of an intellectual endeavor. But I do think that empathy really puts you in the mindset and puts you, I guess, into the heart of the opposite person. And it doesn't mean you have to become that person, but at least be able to imagine yourself that way. Because I think it's really hard to appreciate the other person if you don't understand their feelings towards a single thing, right? I think I've gone in situations where people are so certain that their number one value is everyone else's number one value. And then when they meet other people, they automatically think, okay, that person is wrong. There's something wrong with them. And I think that's definitely the wrong way to go about it. And if you have any bit of empathy, you go, okay, let me put myself in their shoes. And if I was in that situation, how are they feeling? And maybe they'll find out that that person is not necessarily as wrong as they once thought.
Certainly. And I think nowadays empathy is getting less and less traits for people all over the world. People, we need empathy. Be
Mhm.
kind to each other. So, what role does emotional intelligence play in understanding personalities?
So it goes back to the empathy again. I think emotional intelligence is one of those things where we often take for granted or maybe don't value as much. We go to school and all you hear about is like, logic and math. And then even like in the language arts, it's more focused on like linguistics in terms of like, do you know the right words and do you know how to structure sentences? When in fact, I always tell my students, like when you're reading a book, the most important thing is to understand the characters because at the end of the day, you're going to interact with real life people in the real world unless you plan on being a hermit. You're going to work with actual people. And when you read a book, those are just like distillations of like the most purest personality types, right? And you're going to start, when
Yes.
you start understanding those characters, you're going to start seeing them in real life. And that's like one of the most helpful things that you can have. So I think in terms of emotional intelligence, I think we need to kind of get back to like really emphasizing that aspect versus the things that like, let's say grammar and sentence structure that, let's face it, aren't that important.
Yes.
And that's
Truly
coming from
agree.
right, and that's coming from a writer. So,
Truly agree, people. So, how can recognizing personality differences improve teamwork and productivity?
oh, well, I mean, especially for managers, like I've worked with some companies where I've like instructed teams and generally the manager can like understand people, but sometimes understands them in a very like superficial way, right? They're like, okay, this person likes to work at this hour. This person likes to work at this hour. But it's not, that doesn't really go to the heart of the matter. Like, I think sometimes a lot of, especially other personality typing methodologies, tend to focus on what people can see. But I'm more interested in why they are doing the things that they're doing, right? So it's not what someone does, but why do they do it? And I think if you're a manager and you're part of a team, and you know why, the reason why someone does something, then you're able to motivate them better, right? Because not every single person is going to be doing the same task for the same reason. They don't get the same joy out of it like someone else might.
So, Mr. Eric, how does understanding personality types help in setting healthy boundaries?
Well, I mean, definitely not preventing people from being so judgy. I think, unfortunately, when I hate to pick on them, but once half the
Yes.
population is safe and secure, and the thing that makes us feel the most safe, even though it's kind of a false sense of safety, is certainty, right? Like we know, okay, this is black, this is white, and there's no gray. And I think the problem with that is, of course, like we're so set on having these boundaries of black and white that we actually don't even try to understand the other people or the person across from us. And I think in a weird way, kind of like delving into truly understanding that person across from us will actually help us have healthy boundaries in terms of what we can't judge across the table.
Yes, indeed. So, which personality traits are often misunderstood and how can they be appreciated?
There's a lot. I mean, it just depends on the situation. You
Yes.
know, there's a certain pack of personalities, and I call them packs, right? Because not to get really wonkish, but there are four specific personality packs that have four specific values, and then within those packs, there are four animal personality types, so 16 total. But one of those packs is, I call them the Smiths, and they seek information, and I think they are probably the most misunderstood. I think in general, people often either think they're mad scientists, geniuses, and assholes. That's like number one. Those are the three things people think of them. Where
Yes.
if you just understood them more, they just like information. Do they care where they're getting it from? Do they necessarily care about the people that have that information? Maybe not, but that's okay because a lot of those Smiths end up creating inventions or designing things that help all of humanity. So at the end of the day, like Einstein was a Smith, Elon Musk is probably a Smith, Tesla was a Smith. Like they're creating things, and however you feel about them in the personal sense, we still have to appreciate what they how they can benefit society. So
Yes, indeed. How about Steve Jobs? The
yes,
latest Steve Jobs.
exactly. Steve Jobs is funny enough. Steve Jobs, Tesla, like the Nikola Tesla, and Elon Musk are probably the same personality type. They're inventors.
Sure.
They like trying different things. They're a little mischievous, maybe a lot mischievous, and they like kind of getting under people's skin and tweaking them a little bit. Um, and sometimes that can be perceived as being kind of a jerk, and
Yes.
not particularly nice. But we got to take the good with the bad, right? And they can often, that kind of fun-loving, free-flowing personality often comes up with great ideas as well.
So, how does personality shape our reaction to stress and challenges?
It's I think depending on what we value, right? We have different weaknesses, right? So
Yes.
safety and if you value safety and security, I think the worst part of that is you're going to be more likely to be motivated by fear, right? That's like a so people who are in that particular personality pack will tend to not necessarily deal with fear well. Like if you get them really scared, they're going to like get very insular and they're going to circle the wagons and do with whatever makes them feel safe. And I think there's a danger to that, right? Because when we circle the wagons, we can circle it based on nationality. So we can get uber patriotic. We can get very nativist. We can also get very racist, right? Because it's like being in prison, and people go to their whatever particular race because they feel safer around that. I think that particular personality doesn't deal with the stress of fear very well. But I don't want to pick on just them because there are the other personality pack that seeks excitement. They deal with fear really well. They take a lot of risk. That's not going to scare them. Their problem is in stressful moments, they're going to keep wanting more. It's almost like a drug where they have to have it. And obviously that's not particularly healthy. You can't take unnecessary risks. So like each personality pack has their own specific flaws. And so in terms of dealing with stress, those things are going to come out.
So, Mr. Eric, what would be your advice for those people out there who want to cultivate their personality toward their success?
Towards success, I think the number one thing is to figure out what you want, right? Like, what do you want? Like, do you want safety and security? If you do, then you're probably going to want to find a job that is like, I won't say 9 to 5, but has set hours where you're going to be, you're going to get paid,
Yes.
a certain amount. And if you stay there and just work steadily, then you're probably going to get rewarded. If you like excitement and you like doing different things, then you might want to not take that job. You're probably going to be pretty miserable, right? And if you're miserable, then you're probably not going to be very successful, right? So you might want to take jobs that enable you to like travel and move around and like meet different people. And that the same is true for the information seekers, like the Smiths, right? If you have a job where you are just like not creating new things and you're not like learning new things, that can be pretty boring for them. No matter how physically exciting it is, if their mind isn't stimulated, then they're not going to have fun. And it's kind of cool because you could take one person from one personality and put them in another person's favorite job, and that job would be an absolute nightmare, right, for them. And then flips the switch or flip the script, and put that person over in this job, and that's an absolute nightmare for them, right? So I think knowing what our personality is really cool because there are jobs that we can all take and enjoy, and let's just make sure that we take the right one so that we don't take it from someone else who actually would enjoy it, and then we can find something that we like to do.
Again, Mr. Eric, very well said. Beautifully articulated. So, what would be your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
In writing, well, like I'm actually working on a second book right now. And I guess that would be the short and long term, right? The long term would be to release it. But
Yes.
I'm also working, ideally, I'm trying to set up a podcast to do a little bit of research for that book. And the book is going to be personality types and how they affect relationships, right? So my professional background is not necessarily in that kind of counseling. My background is in obviously life coaching and like working with students and like helping them grow as people, maybe not necessarily in a romantic sense. So I would love to do a podcast where I'm talking to people about what do they like, what are they attracted to, what are they not attracted to, and then kind of divide that based on personality types and kind of really see honest answers in terms of what really drives people romantically, and then put that in a book so I can mix the theory with application.
Mr. Eric, I encourage you to do a podcast and empower the people all over the world. And thank you for your advice and good luck for your goals in life. So, what strategies can individuals use to relate better personality vastly different from their own?
I mean, the number one thing is to figure out the other person, right? And not to like shamelessly plug my book, but my book is basically, which is right over that shoulder. Looks at
Yes.
like beautiful orange cover right there. And you can find it anywhere where you buy books. I always say like Amazon, but if you want to not give Jeff Bezos your money, go to your local bookstore and order it. That's great.
Yes.
But that really is the best thing, is to basically like read the book. It'll teach you how to type people. I know that I have a personality test on my website, and I'd love for people to take that and figure out what animal personality type they are. But at the end of the day, that's just a cookie cutter online test. Really, the book kind of goes through the whole methodology. And if you figure that out, then you can, and it's really fun too. I don't want to make it sound like super scientific and really wonky. Like it's fun. It uses a lot. I use a lot of jokes and pop culture references and anecdotes. And ideally, after you've read it, you'll be able to understand, oh, okay, like that person next to me, or my brother and sister, or my parents. You'll start realizing, oh, that is the reason why maybe you argued with them back in the day, or maybe argue with them now. And also the reason why you get along with people or specific people in a certain way.
Yes, indeed. So, can personality awareness help in career choices and professional success?
Yeah, I always tell this story. My cousin's kid just graduated from pharmacy school, and I was asking, like, what do you want to do now? And he was just like, oh, well, as long as it's not like, as long as I don't have to be in the same place, that, at the same, and I'm like, that's exactly what pharmacists do. And so I told him maybe you should get into pharmaceutical sales. So because pharmaceutical salespeople, they get to travel, they get to see different people, they have to hustle. Like it's not a steady thing. Like you got to do really well in that. But the cool thing is, if you hustle and you do a great job, then you can really move up quickly and move up, into the C-suite. And I think he was like, oh well, I don't want to waste all the education I learned in pharmacy school. And I was like, yeah, but you only got one life. Do you want to waste that doing something you don't like? Right. And he was just like, oh, I guess that's a good point. So I do think it is important. No matter what sector you are, you can probably find a job. So it's not like you have to stop pharmaceutical or that sector altogether, the health sector. You can find stuff within each sector that really fits what you want to do. But so don't feel restricted to specific jobs just because you trained for them. Like just figure out what you like and then go with that.
So, Mr. Eric, how does personality influence decision-making process?
Hmm. Yeah, it's all different for everyone. I would say, then what we prioritize is a big thing, right? Like I always say, that's how I can type people a lot of times is like I ask them questions, and what would never occur to one type is the first thing that occurs to this type. Like when someone told me, and this was a Smith, so she values information, right? She said she would go into a burning building to save a book if she thought it was the last book in existence of that particular print. But if you tell that to someone who values safety and security, they would think that's absolutely idiotic, right? They'd be like, there's no way I'm risking my life for a piece of paper, right? Or a bunch of
Yes.
pieces of paper put together. But the Smith will, because they value information that much, where they value it over safety. And I'm not saying every Smith is going to go into a burning building to save the last edition of Moby Dick, but they'll consider it. They'll be like, let me think about that. How hot is it? And whereas like a gatherer, which values safety and security, would never consider it. And I think in terms of decision making, that's kind of a good example, right? Where it's like, yeah, like what we value would never occur to the other person. And so we're going to make decisions that are totally different from the other people in our lives.
So, Mr. Eric, before we wrap up our discussion for tonight, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, and its fifth season, People, fifth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the executive chef or specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. Please do listen to our latest episode. We are reading our letter senders all over the world. So please do listen, Food 101, wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Eric, what's one powerful insight you've gained from exploring your own personality that significantly changed your relationships or life outlook?
I always go back to something my dad said, and it didn't change my life at that moment because he probably said it when I was like 11 or 12, and who listens to their parents at 11 or 12? Or maybe I was 13, which was even worse. And he just told me,
Yes.
you know what? Like whatever you do, like you should just do whatever the hell you want, because at the end of the day, no one cares. Right. Because I was like kind of a poser, and I would like want to wear stuff to like, not, I won't say impress people, but I was very concerned with what other people thought of me. And he's just like, at the end of the day, no, they don't care. Like,
Yes.
so you shouldn't care about what they think, because we are all the main character of our story, and we are not the main character of anyone else's story. No matter how close you are to someone, they could be your significant other. You're always still going to be a side character in their life, which is how it should be. And so we just have to understand that and realize like if we need to care about our lives, because they don't necessarily care. They're never going to care about it as much as we should. So focus on yourself, focus on what you want and who you are, and don't let anyone else tell you what you should be.
Definitely ignore what people say about you because they don't care about you. They just
Right.
want you to fail. So go, 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 people. Mr. Eric G, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
empowering us Thank you for your book, and we are looking forward for more empowering books like this. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your book?
Of course.
So, where can they find?
Oh, well, for my book, go to Amazon.com if you want to find it. You can also find it at your local bookstore, Barnes and Noble, any of the big boxes. I don't necessarily. You can always order it from them, especially if you want to support your local businesses. Order it from your independent bookstore. But if you want to be convenient and delivered to you, go to Amazon.
Yes, indeed. So, people, let's support Mr. Eric G because if you support him, as I said, more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. Eric, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
More to come, people. See you soon.